December 11, 1978. JFK Airport sits quiet in the pre-dawn darkness. Inside a stolen black van, 6 men wait in silence, watching Jimmy Burke, the mastermind behind what would become the biggest cash heist in American history. Vincent Asaro, his trusted connection to the Mafia, checks his watch. If there are no alarms, no gunshots, no sirens, it means everything is going according to plan. The crew takes one final look at the Lufthansa cargo terminal. In minutes, they'll either be rich beyond their wildest dreams or dead. The vault door swings open without resistance. Inside, the first wooden crate is thrown to the ground and breaks open. Bundles of crisp $100 bills spill across the floor, $125,000 in each pack. The crew freezes, staring at the fortune before them. They expected $2 million. This is much bigger. This is it. One of them yells, his voice echoing through the vault. Take all these 50 boxes. They move with practiced precision, knowing they have minutes before their window of opportunity slams shut forever. Crates of cash, burlap bags filled with gold chains and diamonds, the van is loaded in record time. Back in the getaway car, Burke flicks his cigarette out the window with the casual confidence of a man who's orchestrated dozens of heists before. The job is done, his men are on their way out. But this wasn't just another robbery. This was history in the making. 6 men had just pulled off the biggest cash heist the United States had ever seen. What they didn't know was that this was only the beginning of their nightmare. Jimmy Burke didn't plan small jobs. He was a master strategist who planned scores, big, calculated hits with massive rewards and calculated risks. Despite his Irish roots preventing him from becoming a made man in the Italian Mafia, he was one of the most feared and respected gangsters in New York. For years, he operated under Paul Vario, a powerful capo in the Lucchese crime family. Through Vario, Burke controlled loan sharking, extortion, and hijacking operations throughout the city. He was known for 2 things: making enormous amounts of money and eliminating problems before they could start. The Lufthansa job started with a desperate tip from Martin Krugman, a Queens-based bookmaker with deep ties to Burke's crew. Krugman had a contact inside Lufthansa, Louis Werner, who owed tens of thousands of dollars in gambling debts to dangerous people. Werner knew something valuable: millions in untraceable foreign currency regularly moved through JFK Airport before being flown overseas to banks in Europe and beyond. It was the perfect target: unmarked, tax-free cash sitting in a vault with surprisingly minimal security for such enormous amounts of money. Krugman brought the idea to Henry Hill, a longtime Burke associate who understood the value of inside information. Hill took it straight to Burke, knowing his boss would immediately see the opportunity. Burke's eyes lit up when he heard the details. The key was Werner. If he wanted to stay alive and keep his family safe, he had no choice but to cooperate fully. Under intense pressure and death threats, Werner handed over access codes, security schedules, and a detailed layout of the Lufthansa vault. But before Burke could move forward, there was one significant problem he had to solve. John Gotti's crew controlled JFK Airport with an iron fist. Even though the Lufthansa job was technically a Lucchese family operation, the Gambinos ran the airport and demanded tribute from anyone operating on their territory. If Burke and his crew pulled off this massive heist without cutting the Gambinos in, it could start a bloody war between crime families. So Burke, always the diplomat when necessary, arranged a deal. The Gambinos would receive $200,000 from the heist in exchange for looking the other way and providing protection if needed. Their representative, Paolo Lacastri, was sent to oversee the job and make sure the promised money made it back to the Gambino family coffers. Now Burke needed muscle, reliable men who could handle pressure and keep their mouths shut. He turned to Vincent Asaro, a ranking member of the Bonanno crime family, to help assemble the perfect crew. Asaro brought in Tommy DeSimone, a violent enforcer with a dangerously short temper and a reputation for brutality. There was also Angelo Sepe, a disciplined soldier who understood the importance of silence, and Frankie Burke, Jimmy's own son, eager to prove himself in the family business. Gaspar Valente, Asaro's trusted cousin, rounded out the crew. For weeks, they studied blueprints like college students cramming for finals. They meticulously checked the vault's security systems, timed guard shifts down to the minute, and mapped out multiple escape routes in case things went wrong. They rehearsed their movements, practiced their timing, and prepared for every possible scenario. But there was one critical problem Burke hadn't planned for. He had prepared for stealing $2 million. Exactly what the inside man told them would be there. He never planned for 6 times that amount. With that much money at stake, Burke realized the biggest threat wouldn't come from the police or FBI investigators. It would come from within his own crew. Greed had a way of making loyal men turn treacherous, and $6 million was enough to tempt even the most trusted associates to consider betrayal. Burke began planning not just the heist, but the aftermath: how to control his crew, how to manage the money, and most importantly, how to eliminate anyone who might become a liability. The stage was set for one of the most audacious crimes in American history. December 11, 1978, just before 3 a.m. The Lufthansa vault door swings open as planned. The robbers expect to find payroll cash, $2 million at most, enough for a comfortable retirement. Instead, they are staring at an unguarded fortune that exceeds their wildest dreams. Inside the wooden crates, $100 bills are packed in thick bundles, each one containing exactly $125,000. More than $5 million in total cash sits before them, and that's just the beginning. There are also burlap bags stuffed with gold chains, precious diamonds, and foreign currency from international flights. The crew moves with lightning speed, forming a human chain-to-hand crate after crate to the van parked outside the terminal. They keep their movements tight and coordinated. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and the whole job falls apart catastrophically. Inside the Lufthansa facility, employees lie face down, bound and gagged, trying to stay calm. One of them, a supervisor, is shaking uncontrollably from fear and stress. It looks like he might be having a seizure from the trauma. The crew hesitates for a moment, concerned, but they can't waste precious time helping him. Outside the terminal, a cargo transfer agent working the overnight shift notices 2 unmasked men sitting in a black van parked suspiciously at the loading ramp. Something doesn't feel right about the situation. As he drives past in his company vehicle, curiosity gets the better of him. He parks his car and begins walking toward the van to investigate. Before he can turn and run, before he can scream for help or alert security, he's pistol-whipped unconscious and thrown into the van. His discovery threatens to compromise the entire operation at the worst possible moment. Jimmy Burke and Vincent Asaro quickly bring the injured cargo agent inside the building to join the other terrified hostages. The last of the money-filled boxes are being loaded into their vehicles. In under 30 minutes, the crew had completely emptied the vault of its contents. Not a single shot had been fired in anger, not even a security alarm had been tripped. Despite their success, all of them fear that police cruisers would be waiting just around the corner. They are mentally prepared for a last-minute escape and a lengthy, dangerous police chase through Queens, but the night stays eerily quiet. Burke and his men drive away into the darkness, their vehicles loaded with more money than most people see in a lifetime. By sunrise, the Lufthansa heist was dominating national news broadcasts. December 11th may go down as the day of the biggest robbery in our country's history, and it happened right here in New York, reported one news anchor. Somewhere between $3 and $5 million in cash and valuables was taken from the Lufthansa cargo terminal out at Kennedy Airport. Law enforcement officers say it was carried off with such precision and daring, you almost have to consider it an inside job. Reporters from across the country speculated about how a professional crew could slip in and out of an international airport completely undetected. The FBI immediately launched a massive investigation, deploying their best agents and utilizing informants throughout the New York underworld, but they had no immediate arrests to show for their efforts. Jimmy Burke's meticulous plan had worked flawlessly. His men had pulled off what appeared to be the perfect heist. But Burke lived by one unbreakable rule that had kept him alive and out of prison for decades: no loose ends. Within days, the real heist would begin, not for money, but for survival. For weeks following the robbery, the Lufthansa heist remained the biggest news story, dominating headlines across the country. The FBI flooded JFK Airport with agents, questioning every employee who had access to the cargo areas, searching desperately for evidence, and reviewing hours of grainy security footage. But the robbers had been incredibly careful in their planning and execution. They left behind no fingerprints, triggered no security alarms, and created no immediate leads for investigators to follow. It seemed like they had committed the perfect crime and would never be caught. The first breakthrough came just 2 days after the heist. NYPD officers impounded a black Ford van that had been parked illegally in front of a fire hydrant in Brooklyn. When they ran the license plates through their database, they discovered the vehicle had been reported stolen weeks earlier. Officers searched the van's interior, which appeared to have been thoroughly cleaned, but it wasn't clean enough to fool forensic experts. Crime scene technicians found several fingerprints on the steering wheel and door handles. When they ran those prints through the FBI database, they got their first solid match: Parnell Stacks Edwards. Stacks wasn't just some random low-level criminal. He had a long history of handling stolen vehicles for Burke's crew and knew the drill better than anyone. The cardinal rule was simple: no evidence, no mistakes, no traces left behind. But this time, perhaps overwhelmed by the magnitude of the heist, he got dangerously sloppy. Edwards' fingerprints put the FBI directly onto Burke's crew within just 3 days of the robbery. Federal investigators immediately turned their full attention to Robert's Lounge, Burke's notorious bar, and a well-known Lucchese family hangout where criminal business was regularly conducted. The FBI moved quickly to establish comprehensive surveillance. They planted listening devices throughout the bar, bugged the payphones that criminals used to conduct business, and followed Burke's crew from the sky using helicopters equipped with high-powered cameras. One recorded conversation particularly stood out to investigators. Angelo Sepe was captured on tape telling someone about a brown case and a bag from Lufthansa. Another conversation, partially muffled by loud background noise, captured him saying, "I want to see where the money's at. Dig a hole in the cellar." It wasn't enough evidence for search warrants, but it confirmed their suspicions completely. Burke's crew was definitely involved in the Lufthansa heist, and now the FBI just needed someone to crack under pressure and provide testimony. But Burke wasn't particularly worried about the FBI investigation at this point. He was far more concerned about his own people. They had stolen so much money that media attention was intense and constant. Someone in his crew was inevitably going to talk, either to impress friends or to cut a deal with prosecutors. That's when Burke made the most cold-blooded decision of his criminal career. No loose ends, no matter who had to die. The first person to be eliminated was Parnell Edwards, whose careless fingerprints had brought FBI heat down on the entire operation. 7 days after the heist, Tommy DeSimone and Angelo Sepe tracked him down to a small apartment where he was desperately hiding from Burke's wrath. Edwards barely had time to react or plead for his life before they shot him 5 times in the head, execution style. His murder sent a clear message to anyone else considering cooperation with law enforcement. But Edwards' death was just the beginning of Burke's systematic elimination of potential witnesses and liabilities. The main problem Burke was facing wasn't law enforcement. It was managing the enormous amount of stolen money. He had carefully planned for stealing $2 million, but ended up with over $6 million in cash and valuables. There was simply too much money to handle safely and far too many people expecting their promised cuts from the job. The crew celebrated in the days following the heist, expecting to receive their substantial shares within a week. But Burke wasn't paying anyone their full amount. He told them they needed to lay low while the money was carefully laundered through legitimate businesses. What the crew didn't realize was that Burke never intended to pay them their full shares of the heist. He handed out small amounts of cash, just enough to keep them temporarily satisfied and quiet while he figured out how to make the majority of the stolen money disappear permanently. Burke was a master at money laundering, funneling portions through his extensive loan sharking operation, hiding large amounts in secret offshore bank accounts, and using trusted money launderers in Brooklyn to wash the rest through legitimate businesses. The real heist wasn't just stealing the money, it was the systematic cleanup that followed. Next came a series of calculated murders that would become legendary in organized crime circles. Martin Krugman, who had originally brought the tip about the Lufthansa vulnerability, was murdered when he started asking too many questions about his cut. Richard Eaton, Robert Capra, and Marty Krugman all met violent ends. Even Paolo Lecastri, the Gambino family's official representative who was supposed to collect their promised $200,000 cut, wasn't safe from Burke's paranoia. When Lecastri started aggressively pushing for the Gambino family's money, he ended up face down in a trash heap in Queens, another victim of Burke's no loose ends policy. By the end of 1979, nearly everyone who had been involved in the Lufthansa heist was either dead or permanently missing. The FBI had plenty of suspects, and Burke's name was at the top of their list. Bodies were turning up all over New York, each one connected to the airport robbery. But without living witnesses willing to testify, federal prosecutors had absolutely nothing they could take to court. Burke had accomplished what no one thought was possible. He had pulled off the biggest cash robbery in United States history and seemingly gotten away with it completely. For a brief moment, it looked like he had won the ultimate victory against law enforcement. But there was one thing that even the cunning Jimmy Burke couldn't control: time. And time was rapidly running out for his criminal empire. In 1980, the FBI finally got the breakthrough they had been desperately seeking, but it had nothing to do with the Lufthansa investigation. It had everything to do with drugs and Burke's violation of sacred Mafia rules. For years, Paul Vario, the Lucchese capo Burke worked under, had strictly forbidden his men from dealing drugs. The money was tempting, but the federal sentences were much harsher, and drug operations inevitably brought unwanted federal attention and government. Burke didn't care about Vario's drug prohibition. He saw the enormous profits available in cocaine and heroin trafficking and wanted a share. By the late 1970s, he and Henry Hill were deeply involved in a massive drug trafficking operation that stretched across New York, Pennsylvania, and beyond state lines. But Hill was becoming increasingly reckless in his operations, and people in his organization were getting dangerously sloppy with security. There were persistent whispers throughout the underworld that federal agents were watching their every move, and the worst thing anyone could be in Jimmy Burke's world was a liability to the organization. In April 1980, the DEA finally moved decisively against the drug operation. Henry Hill was arrested on serious trafficking charges and was looking at life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. That was bad enough for Burke's organization, but the real problem was much worse. Burke had already made up his mind about Hill's fate. The moment Hill made bail, he would be murdered like all the others. But Hill had seen exactly what happened to the Lufthansa crew. He had watched Burke systematically eliminate almost everyone connected to the heist, and he realized that betraying Jimmy Burke first was his only chance of survival. Burke had already made his final decision about Hill, but before he could act, the FBI made Hill an offer he couldn't refuse. His choice was brutally simple: turn government informant against his longtime associates, or end up dead like the rest of them. Hill chose survival and flipped, becoming a federal witness. Once he started talking to prosecutors, he didn't stop. He told the FBI everything, not just about Lufthansa, but about the systematic murders, the money laundering, the payoffs, and Burke's entire criminal operation. Burke was arrested that same year, not for the Lufthansa heist, but for the murder of Richard Eaton. It was enough to put him away forever, ending one of the most notorious criminal careers in American history.